Welcome back to the DSR channel, and I am covering everything now in the new book, Eberron, Forge of the Artificer, which has got some really cool stuff. It's a much anticipated expansion that I think a lot of us have been waiting for. I love Artificers, so this one's been a big deal for me. And I'm going to cover the airships and vehicles and ship combat rules now in this video. But if you've already read this chapter or looked at it, and you're wondering like, hey, there aren't enough rules here to play ship combat, you're right. Um, Most of the rules for ship combat are actually over here in Ghosts of the Saltmarsh, the adventure anthology. And it makes sense they put them here because these feature a lot of ships. But at the very least, what they should be doing is referencing, like pointing you back that this is where the rules are, right? This is like the big problem they had with Spelljammer. When Spelljammer came out, a big part of Spelljammer is the ships. I mean, that's literally the names of the ships. They are spelljamming ships, right? And so that's like the big, just a huge part of that campaign setting. And they didn't print any rules for ship combat because they're all here. I mean, I assume it's because they're all here, and they just didn't want to reprint them all. Also, it's like 50 pages in this Appendix A, right here in Ships Ghosts of Saltmarsh. So, I guess it doesn't make sense to reprint that huge volume every time. And so, what they really need to do is pull this section out, make it its own downloadable content, and also update it and reconcile it with all the like tweaks they've been making to ship rules in that they made in Spelljammer, and now again with this book, Eberron Forge of the Artificer, where they've tweaked some things again. So they need to like consolidate those rules, remove the conflicts, reconcile the conflicts, simplify it down to where they want it to be, and then print that, or I wouldn't even print it. Just make it its own digital book. And anybody, I don't know, maybe charge a few bucks for it. I don't care. Some people might be irritated about buying it again. I don't know. Make it free. Like they did with like the Waterdeep lore book and the Baldur's Gate lore book. What are those called? I forget what those are called. But anyway, I think those are just digital downloads that are free. You can get anyway. So maybe do the same thing with this, okay? Because it keeps confusing people, and if you're not going to like at least point them back here and tell us how to reconcile the conflicts, make it a digital download, or just reference this in every place that you have ship rules. Just say, yeah, here's the rest of the rules if you want to do actual ship to ship combat. All right, so and the rest of the rules, and this book actually does a good job of at least pointing you to the remaining rules that are in the player's handbook and the rules that are in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So at least tells you to go there for those things. But neither of those have the rules for ship to ship combat. What it amounts to is just rules for using your ship as a battlefield, and you're on the ship fighting, and you can be using the weapons on the ship to shoot other ships or other creatures, but it's really your ship as a battlefield, not ships fighting each other and blowing each other up, right? That you need Ghosts of Saltmarsh to really run that, or come up with your own system, right? Okay, so going through it, and you'll see this is chapter 7 from the book Eberron, Forge of the Artificer, and you'll see a lot of these kind of pieces that look like noir type elements, noir type art, and things like that. And noir is a base aspect of the Eberron campaign, right? That is one of the intentions that Keith Baker, the creator of this campaign, put into this campaign setting. Um, it is intended to be noir, so a lot of stuff is noir because of that. Otherwise, you might be like, "Whoa, that's weird that it's black and white." They're intending to go noir with this. Um, except he released on Dungeon Masters Guild. He released a supplement for Kabara that is like the Wild West. So I guess that's not noir, but everything else is. Yeah. All right. So awesome art as per usual with these books we're getting. A little text explaining during the last war and in its wake, artificers across Corvair made many magical and mechanical advances, but none quite as impressive as the elemental airship. All right, and that's what these are. They created these airships, so it's very recent, like the last half dozen years airships were created and started, flying around in Eberron. First airships appeared only a handful of years ago, which is the product of a collaboration between the workshops of House Caneth, the dragon-marked heirs of House Lyrandar, and the elemental binders in Zilargo, which I think are primarily gnomes. Only a dragon-marked heir with the Mark of Storm can easily use an airship's magical helm to control the elemental bound to the vessel and pilot the ship. So House Lyrandar maintains a monopoly on airship travel and services. And we'll actually see references to Mark of the Storm in these mechanics, but they also included other marks as well, which is very cool. I'm glad they did that to make it more not just all about Mark of Storm, but there's other ones that are that make sense to be involved in the mechanics. All right, rules on operating an airship. Okay, super sparse. First up, it explains that you have crew members and stations. A station is something like a weapon, like a ballista or the helm. Okay, kind of basically comes down to those things. They have created their own version of a helm crew station here. On in Ghost of Saltmarsh, they have helms which are like the steering wheel and the mechanisms for the rudder. Here, it's the helm is the place where the mark of somebody, the dragon marked air, who has the mark of the storm, is standing to control the air, and where they control the air elemental. It could be a fire elemental or an air elemental. I think I don't know if water or earth are involved in the airships. Where they control the elemental. Okay, that's the helm, and if you destroy it, they can no longer move. It tells you the AC and the hit points. It clarifies and clearly points out that the helm is an object, which means it's immune to most spells, because most spells can't target objects. Like only Firebolt is the only cantrip that can target objects, which is one of the main, one of the important rider effects of it is you can just be shooting objects and starting them on fire. The Acid Splash can hit objects because it's an area effect, not a creature target. So it just happens in an area, which could affect objects. It tells you here that you've got 2 actions for the person who's in the helm. They can either use the drive action or shift engine, and it tells you both of those have a prerequisite of something, right? In this case, it's you have to have a mark of the storm to do these things. And drive lets you move the ship up to its fly speed in any direction, and shift engine allows you to turn on or off the core. I don't know why you'd want to turn that off in combat, but you definitely want it on. So, and you get one special move. So when you take the drive action, you can do like a barrel roll of the ship, and it actually gives rules for people falling off or falling, if they're inside it, falling to the ceiling of it. And why would you want to do that? Maybe your crew is trained in dealing with that, and they have ropes and hooks that they like anchor themselves to the deck with, and then you get boarded, and so you do a barrel roll to make all the boarders, the enemies, fall off, and your people are all attached by ropes. That's how I would use it. Okay, going on, they talk about ship repairs, and this is the first place that it references the player's handbook. So let's go over the repair rules here first before we go over to the player's handbook. It says if any crew station or the hull, so it says the airship. In Ghost of Saltmarsh, it separates it out and calls it the hull, but the hull is the same as the ship. If anything's damaged and has at least 1 point of damage, then a creature can spend an hour or more trying to repair it. The repairs, you must be able to reach the damaged area, and the repairs, and you must have 100 or more gold pieces worth of spare parts to make the emergency repairs. So after each hour of work, you make a dexterity sleight of hand check or an intelligence arcana check using these tools, right? And whenever you see that kind of wording, what they're telling you is if you are proficient in one of them, either the skill or one of those tools, then you roll the check with your proficiency bonus. If you're proficient with both the skill and a tool, then you have advantage. Yeah, rules is written right in Player's Handbook, and it's been there since Xanathar's Guide to Everything in 2017. Rules is written. You get advantage on that roll for being proficient in both the skill and the tool. Okay. On a successful check, the airship or crew station regains 2d4 plus 2 hit points, and the parts are consumed. If the check fails, the repair can be attempted again using the same replacement parts. Note that the materials are not consumed when you fail, so you just keep trying it. And that's why it says over here, a creature can spend 1 or more hours trying to make the repairs, right? That's because every check is another hour. So if you fail, you just keep trying until you successfully check it, until you succeed. Or give up, I guess. But once an airship or crew station has regained hit points from an emergency repair, it can't do so again until the ship has been docked. So you must dock it to repair anymore, which makes sense because you shouldn't be able to fully repair a heavily damaged ship just with spare parts you have on board and while you're flying around. So let's go over to the players. It's actually, yeah, it is in the player's handbook, this piece. So here we have the rules in the player's handbook. It's kind of just talks about the basics. You need a crew. You have a speed. You can hold some passengers. You can charge them amount of money. A damage threshold. The damage threshold, what that is if it has a damage threshold, and you can see the vehicles listed in the player's handbook, all have, or most of them have a damage threshold. What that means is when they are hit by a single damage event or a single instance of damage, whether it's an attack or a spell, fireball, right? If the damage does not exceed that, it doesn't meet or exceed that, then it takes no damage. So if the galley is hit by an attack that does 19 damage, then you take none, right? Because you have to meet the threshold in order to deal any damage to it. So it could be hit all day long by attacks dealing 19 damage, and it'll never actually be damaged. But as soon as you hit 20, it takes all 20 damage. So this isn't the same as resistance at all. So it's just an all or nothing. Okay, you can see here the ship repair rules, which is repairs to a damaged ship can be made while the ship is berthed, which means docked. Repairing 1 hit point of damage requires 1 day and costs 20 gold pieces for materials and labor. If the repairs are made in a location where supplies and skilled labor are abundant, such as a city shipyard, the repair time and costs are halved. Right? That's the entirety of the ship repair rules in 2024 now. And this book, Eberron Forge of the Artificer, adds to that in that you can make emergency repairs, which was already in Ghosts of Saltmarsh, but Ghosts of Saltmarsh had no rules for repairing the ship when docked. But Spelljammer had rules for repairing a ship when docked, which is, I think, interesting. So the repair rules here, officers and crew, you can see that there was these special officers: the captain, the first mate, the bosun, the quartermaster, the surgeon, and cook. So the bosun, or boatswain, has a special action that only the bosun can do while you're not in combat. Okay, and so there's this section: travel at sea, activity while traveling, and all of the officers have an activity while traveling that they can perform, and the bosun can repair the ship. And it says they need to be proficient with carpenter's tools. We've got a few more options listed under in Eberron Forge of the Artificer for the repairs, more tool options than that. But this was 2014, and Ghost of Saltmarsh, which is one of the older 2014 books, on a 15 or higher, whereas in Eberron Forge of the Artificer, it's a 16 or higher. So we've got to reconcile these rules. Each damage component regains hit points equal to 1d6 plus a crew's quality score, minimum of 1 hit point. The crew's quality score is a stat that only appears in Ghost of Saltmarsh. It's not repeated in Spelljammer or Eberron Forge of the Artificer. Also note that this form of repair repairs every single component on the ship. So it repairs the ship's hull plus every damaged crew station, every weapon, and a component other than the hull that had 0 hit points becomes functional again. If the hull hits 0 hit points, it sinks. And there's no limit, so you can just keep doing this until you fully repair the ship in the Ghost of the Saltmarsh. But both Spelljammer and Forge of the Artificer both say you can only do emergency repairs once, and then you've got to dock to repair it further, which I think makes more sense. So again, this is an example of where they need to put it all together, reconcile all the conflicts, simplify some things down, and then give us that as a singular supplement instead of piecemealing it all over the place across all these books. All right, so that's the repairs. All right, crashing. So this one's interesting. Of course, if you want to play ship-to-ship combat, you definitely want to ram another ship sometimes, if not all the time. Like every time I've run ship-to-ship combat, I think the players attempted to ram the other ship at least once, if not multiple times. Okay, so it's interesting. I guess that represents the designers, how interested they are in having ships crash. So they have reprinted crashing rules, or printed the crashing rules in all 3 of these supplements. So yes, Ghost of Saltmarsh has crashing rules, Spelljammer has crashing rules, and Forge of the Artificer has crashing rules. But Forge of the Artificer has the worst crashing rules. I think it's actually equally bad with the Spelljammer rules. So I would go to Ghost of Saltmarsh, which has the best crashing rules and the most interesting crashing rules, okay? But the Forge of the Artificer, what it's saying is, okay, you can attempt to ram something. Both the object, the ship, and the creature or object that you hit take bludgeoning damage based on the size of the struck target. So it's not based on your size, it's based on the size of the thing you hit. as shown in this table right here. So if you hit a medium-sized creature, you both take 2d10 damage. If a ship crashes into a creature or an object of its size or larger, it stops. Otherwise, the ship continues moving if it has any movement left, and whatever is struck moves to the nearest unoccupied space that isn't in the ship's path. Goes to Salt Marsh, and I think Spelljammer both have this additional clause that says if it can't move, the DM may decide the thing is destroyed. So if you hit something, deal damage to it, and it's immobile, like fixed to the ground, or fixed to the ground, then you destroy it instead of forcing it to move aside. This one also says when an airship crashes, each creature on board makes a DC 10 strength or dex save, its choice. On a failed save, a creature takes bludgeoning damage based on the size of the struck target as shown in the table and has the prone condition. On a successful save, a creature takes half as much damage only. So that means if your ship hits a gargantuan creature, everybody on board takes 6d10 damage, or half if they make this save. So, but most of your crew members are commoners with 4 hit points, which means it doesn't matter if they're taking half or not. You might as well not even roll. They're all just dead. Because the average damage for 16d10 is like 90. Yeah, 90 damage or something like that. And then you have that to 45. Great. That still beats 4 hit points. So all of your crew members just die if you hit something big. So you are heavily disincentivized to attempt to ram other ships using these rules. Avoiding a crash. A creature in the path of a crashing airship makes a dexterity 15 saving throw. On a successful save, the creature moves to the nearest unoccupied space that isn't in the ship's path and takes no damage, and neither of you take crashing damage. So I don't even know why they print this. If they might as well just say, don't crash, and just avoid crashes at all costs, never ram another ship, and if you do happen to crash into another ship, you're both wrecked, like just destroyed, right? Like they should have made it as simple as that instead of putting all these rules in, because that's what the outcome is. Yeah, not great. Whereas if we go over here, you can see that they've got a crashing section on Spelljammer as well. There's a little more detail and a few things that reference specifically Spelljammer, which is why it makes sense that it's a little bit different, because the ship isn't moved by any kind of force other than the Spelljammer. The one person who's sitting in the magical chair that runs the ship, and the ship's mobility is based on the magic imbued into the ship when it's constructed, and its maneuverability is based on the person piloting it who's sitting in that chair. So you would make an attack roll which is just a 1d20, using the Spelljammers, that's the person sitting in the chair, using their proficiency bonus against the target's AC. If you hit, you crash, but otherwise it kind of works the same. You just take a bunch of damage. Both ships take a bunch of damage. There's a little bit additional rules explaining like the air envelopes, because the Spelljammer ships fly through space. And so if you're in wild space, you don't have air, except that there's this bubble around you. And when you crash into each other, your air envelopes overlap, and it has a few comments on how that works. I'm not going to get into it more than that, because this is not a Spelljammer video. There's also a thing about the gravity planes, because each ship projects its own gravity plane, and what happens when those interact when you ram into each other. Again, I'm not going to do any more detail than that. So again, bit of a bummer. Like you're only disincentivized to ram other ships, even though several of the Spelljammer ships were explicitly created to ram other ships. Like it's written into the description of the ship. It's still in the description of the ship in Spelljammer that it says it's supposed to be a ramming ship, and yet you're disincentivized to ram. And here's one additional piece that I missed earlier in the repair rules, which is the Spelljammer repair rules are basically the same as what's in the player's handbook now, but has a section about using the mending cantrip, and the mending cantrip can repair a component only once per hour, but there's no limit other than that. So given enough time, you can completely repair your ship to 100% just using the mending cantrip, which is suddenly makes the mending cantrip ultra powerful. It seems too powerful to me given the costs, right? Otherwise, it's like could be easily 1,000 gold pieces just to repair your ship in like 2 months of time, right? Or you can in like 2 days repair it completely with a mending cantrip. It seems a little too strong, but I do think that the mending cantrip should be allowed to do something. I would probably limit it like the emergency repairs, which is yes, you can use the mending cantrip, but once you've repaired repaired any kind of component with a mending cantrip, it works the same as emergency repairs, which means you cannot do it again until it's docked. So you can only repair each thing once using either the mending cantrip or emergency repairs. That's how I would run it. All right, let's jump over to Ghost of Saltmarsh for its crashing rules, which I keep saying are the best. Okay, so crashing a ship kind of works the same. Um, it has this clause here that doesn't appear anywhere else, which I think makes a lot of sense, which is you can only crash into something that is one size smaller than you or larger. If it's two sizes smaller than you or smaller, it automatically avoids the crash. It automatically moves out of the way. I think that makes sense, right? So you can't just like ram into a medium-sized flying creature because you're just not that maneuverable. Like they would just move out of the way. So they have to be at least one size smaller or larger, or you just automatically miss the ram. Okay, but when you ram into it, if it does qualify given the size, then both objects. Sorry, then when a ship crashes, so if you ram into a ship, both of you make a Constitution saving throw, and it's the ship that makes the Constitution saving throw. So let me jump over to that and show you in the stat blocks that they've presented here. So you've got the galley. I'll just show you one of these. Has strength, dexterity, and constitution scores. It has no intelligence, wisdom, or charisma. And you might think, well, what's the point of giving strength, dexterity, and con if not the other ones? Well, you need these for some things. Like if it's being targeted by a firebolt, you need the AC. If it's being targeted by an acid splash, I guess you need the dexterity because it could attempt to avoid it with a -3 modifier and no other bonuses. It's pretty low. But what about, a lot of spells do intelligence, wisdom, charisma saving throws. Why don't we have stats for that? It's because I haven't gone through and exhaustively checked, but I'm pretty sure every single spell that causes an intelligence, wisdom, or charisma saving throw says targets a creature. Okay. And therefore you cannot target objects, which every vehicle is an object. All right. But we're back. Okay. So we've got a constitution score, which is 20 for the galley. So the galley would make that with a 1d20 plus 5 modifier, right? It's not proficient with the constitution saving throws, but it still applies. And these things represent like the sturdiness of the ship, the level of technology used to build the ship that makes it better, stronger, the materials in the ship that make it better, stronger, and the dexterity score is the maneuverability of the ship, right? The lower the dexterity score, the slower it turns, it makes its turns, things like that. Which is a good way to represent those things without adding new game statistics. Second edition had new game statistics like a maneuverability score for every ship and engine, and you combine those to calculate what your actual maneuverability class was. Very cool in theory. Too many rules to practically execute when you're playing the game. And in fact, these rules are a lot to try to execute in game. I've used them a few times. It's a lot. So this is the maximum amount of complexity I think is a good idea if you're going to do ship-to-ship combat in Dungeons and Dragons. There's other systems where it's just ship-to-ship combat and the people aren't part of the combat. It's just a ship. And those probably have way better rules for handling ship combat just like that. But in D&D, I would go no more complex than this. So you make a Constitution saving throw. On a save, the objects take no damage. The ships take no damage on a save. On a fail, it takes the full damage to the hull based on the numbers here in this table. So if one gargantuan ship rams another gargantuan ship, both of you are making a DC 10 Constitution save. Both ships are making a DC 10 Constitution save, or they're going to take 16d10 damage. On a success, your ship takes no damage. Okay, so it's still like equal, right? Like you're not necessarily incentivized unless your ship is bigger and has a better Constitution score. Now you have an advantage against the other ship, right? Where you have a higher Constitution modifier. This one also says a creature stuck by the ship can make a save or take half as much damage, and they make a dexterity save against the damage of the ship. So if you ram a creature, it may take less damage than you, right? Because I guess it's a save for half, so it might take more damage than you, I guess. So that's wrong, right? On a fail, it takes full damage. On a success, it takes half damage, whereas your ship on a success takes no damage. On a fail, takes full damage. Kind of interesting. Again, another example of they need to bring these rules together, reconcile them, simplify them, and make them all work for us. But let's go back to that galley real quick. Okay. You may have noticed this section on the galley, which is it has a weapon called the naval ram. So this is built into the galley. It's got its own AC and hit points. It has its own damage threshold, but the galley gives your ship advantage on all saving throws related to crashing. So now not only do you have a +5 on that Constitution saving throw, you have advantage on the save, which means it's much more likely that you're not going to take damage versus the other ship, okay? And the rams only apply when you're the one ramming. So if you're the one who moves into them and ram them, your ram applies. If they have a ram, it doesn't apply. It doesn't give them advantage, right? And any damage your ship takes, if you fail the save, is applied to your ram, not your hull. And the ram has 100 hit points of its own. So it can take 100 hit points of damage before your ram is destroyed, and then your hull starts taking damage. So very cool. Now you're heavily incentivized to, yes, ram other ships using a ship built for ramming. Awesome. And I love that. So, and your players are definitely going to want to ram another ship. I guarantee it. At some point, if they got a ship, they're going to ram somebody. I would use these rules, I would use these stat blocks, and these are compatible, right? It looks like a lot here. It's a lot more than the stat blocks we have in Forge of the Artificer or Spelljammer, and even the player's handbook, right? This is the whole stat block that you get from the player's handbook. Yes, it's got like a little hover over stat block, but those stats are the exact same as what's in this table. So this is super, super simplified. Okay, but if you go through and calculate everything, this AC and those hit points, these are the same as what they have in Ghosts of Saltmarsh. Okay, so the galley has an AC of 15 and 500 hit points. You can see it's got that same thing here. Oh, here we go. And like I said, they separate it out to the hull. So the ship in those other supplements is the hull in this. So the galley has an AC of 15 and 500 hit points and a damage threshold of 20, which is identical to that table from the player's handbook and works the same way. They just list out these things for you, right? So these are the same, right? If you go into the Dungeon Master's Guide on siege weapons, the ballista has an AC of 15 and 50 hit points. If you go back to Ghost of Saltmarsh, yes, the ballista has right here an AC of 15 and 50 hit points. So it's the same. So this stat block is still compatible with all the latest rules. They do one thing different, which is, you may notice this section. The stat block for the galley in Ghost of Saltmarsh has this section called Actions, and it says the galley can take 3 actions, choosing from the options below. It can only take 2 actions if it has fewer than 40 crew, and only 1 action if it has fewer than 20. And it can take these actions if it can't take any actions if it has fewer than 3. So if you've got 3 to 20, you can take 1 action. Or sorry, 3 to 19. Right? Fewer than 20, not fewer than or equal to. Okay, and the 3 actions are fire all of your ballistas, or fire all of your mangonels, or move, right? And you got notations over here. The galley has 4 ballistas and 2 mangonels, and then move. And the move is based on either if you're using oars because there's no wind or sails because there is wind. And so that's how it moves. And it tells you how fast it moves for those 2 sections. All right, but if you look at the Dungeon Master's Guide, and we're going to see this again back when we get back to Eberron Forge of the Artificer, it has these notations. It says, okay, here's the ballista, and the ballista bolt is the attack, but it requires 2 things, load and aim. And yet it doesn't give you any guidance for what load and aim are. But the way it works is load is an action and aim is an action, and then firing the ballista bolt or ballista bolt is a third action. And the ballista bolt is when you actually make the attack roll. You've got, here's the stats on the attack roll, blah, blah, blah. So what this means is you need at least 3 separate creatures, each using their action to man this one ballista and to fire it once per round. If there's only 1 creature doing it, they can still do it themselves, but now it's going to fire once per 3 rounds unless you're a fighter who can action surge, right? So that's how these work. Okay, if you go back to Ghost of Saltmarsh, you can see that it just says, no, fire all your ballista as long as you have enough crew. If you actually do the math, these rules are still completely compatible and work together. What they're doing is just simplifying it for you, because if you have 80 crew members, then you're fully staffed, which means you have the required 3 people per ballista, a total of 12 people for all 4 ballistas. The mangonels require, let's go down to mangonels in the Dungeon Master's Guide. The mangonel requires, yes, 3 actions as well, load, aim, and mangonel stone. Okay, I guess it spells that out right here. Load and aim are 2 utilized actions. sorry, load is 2 utilize actions, and aiming is 2 utilize actions for the mangonel. So this requires 5 people to activate it in 1 round. So let's double check that. Loading the ballista requires 1 utilize, aiming it requires 1 more utilize. So yes, the ballista is 3 actions, the mangonel is 5 actions. All right, so if you go over here to the Ghost of Saltmarsh, all right, we would need 12 people to man all the ballistas. We would need 10 more people to man the mangonels. And then if you're using oars, you need 40 people. If you're using the sails, you need fewer people. It's unspecified. But that's where they're simplifying this for you, is to say, okay, don't go through and calculate and keep track of, like, you definitely don't want to roll initiative for all of these people, the total of 22 people manning your weapons, right? Don't roll initiative for them. That's going to make your combat insane. Don't figure out, how many are, the 40 people who are manning the oars, right? Which you need in tactical situations on a ship on the ocean, right? Sailing isn't usually, like, the sails usually isn't enough to be maneuverable enough. And so between 40 people for the oars and 22 people for the weapons, you need 62 people plus the officers to fully run the ship, and your crew complement total is 80. All right. And so they're just making this simpler for you. As long as you have the 80 people, you can pretty much get everything covered. If you have 39 or less, then you can, if you have less than the 80, has fewer than 40. Okay. You can only take 2 actions if you have fewer than 40, right? You can only take 1 action of fewer than 20. So it's just doing that math for you, figuring out that, yes, you can't actually do all these turns, make all these actions, because you don't have enough people to man everything. So it's a simplified way of looking at it. All right. Which I recommend, because even using that simplified action economy is still a lot to manage in ship-to-ship combat. Okay, there's all those things. Let's get back over to Eberron, Forge of the Artificer. So yes, I would use the Ghost of Saltmarsh crashing rules so that the players are incentivized to ram other ships, and it will be fun instead of just being like, well, we both got wrecked. Yeah. All right, they have this thing about elemental engines, because that is how the airships in Eberron are powered. And just as another quick note, player's handbook, they have this thing called Airship. This is very different from the Eberron Forge of the Artificer airship. The airship in the player's handbook is like a Zeppelin, right, with a big, bubble, and it's basically a thing floating under a balloon, right? Like a blimp is what we would more commonly think of now, but that's what a Zeppelin is. So that's what this airship is. All right. This airship does not have a balloon. It flies, I think, more the way everybody wants the fantasy to work, where it's a ship that flies through magic. That's what this airship is. So it's got this elemental core, which is the engine that runs the whole ship, and a little bit of rules. But the notable rules on that is that, yes, the ship gets deactivated if it moves into an anti-magic field. If the engine is targeted by a dispel magic spell, the core is suppressed for 1 minute, and you can actually dispel magic on each component to disable it for a minute. So you can disable your, like, weapons on these airships by hitting them with a dispel magic for 1 minute. And you can fly into an anti-magic shield, which disables your ship. Now, the very important note here is that your ship doesn't fall out of the sky if its elemental core is disabled, right? It just stays hovering in the same location. So there's enough, I don't know, innate magic in it to keep it in the air. It doesn't just drop like a rock, which is probably more of a game design decision than a lore decision, right? I don't know if it makes sense that the ship somehow magically stays in the air, even if the engine is disabled. But otherwise, if you didn't do that, it would just be like dispel magic. Why would you put weapons on the ships? You would just have magic casters on there firing dispel magic at the other ship until they knock out the core, and then the ship just drops out of the sky, everybody dies, ship is destroyed. Right? So it's a game design reason. I assume it's a game design reason, not a lore reason. There's also a note here that says, okay, if the DM wants to allow it in some sort of emergency situation, yes, people who don't have the Lyrandar dragon mark or the dragon mark of storm can still pilot the ship. But what they're trying to do is force the elemental who's, like, built into the engine to obey them. So they have to make these intelligence arcana or charisma intimidation or persuasion check to try to force the elemental or convince the elemental to do what they want. But it also has this neat section on saying that you can use charm monster or dominate monster to help, right? Charm monster, and it says they automatically fail these saves against this. Like part of being built into the ship means they fail these saves. So you automatically succeed with charm monster, and then you have advantage on these checks, the intelligence arcana check or the charisma intimidation persuasion check. Or if you use dominate monster, you automatically can pilot the ship without making any checks at all. And they automatically fail their saves. So if you have dominate monster, you can just take over the ship and run it just fine as long as dominate monster lasts. And you can upcast it to increase the duration of it. All right, moving on in Eberron Forge of the Artificer, you see there's some rules on breaking the core. Look that up when it becomes relevant. Most of the time it won't be relevant. Wind wards. This one is good to know, but you don't need it for ship-to-ship combat. What this one means is essentially is the ship itself stabilizes the air around the ship, okay, which means the crew members can be on the ship's deck and not suffer the effects of high altitude or strong winds. Like they don't automatically get blown off. These wind wards also give them advantage on saving throws to avoid being pushed off the deck. So if they get hit by some sort of a thing that would push them and that would push them over the deck, the wind wards actually give them advantage to resist that effect if they get a save, right? Repelling blast, no save. Push weapon mastery, no save. So yeah, if you board their ship, it's probably a lot more effective rather than trying to deal damage and kill the creatures. Just bing, 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 knock them off the edge of the ship. And yes, I think that's the sound it would make. Bing. All right, airships in combat. Don't be deceived. It gives you no rules on airships in combat. It talks about maneuvering the ship, but all it really says is if the person in the helm who's piloting the ship, that's the person with the dragon mark of storm, who is operating the ship, commanding the elemental who's bound to it. If they become incapacitated, the ship no longer maneuvers and doesn't stop. It just keeps going in the same direction at the same speed it did last turn until the pilot is no longer incapacitated. But if there is no pilot, like you pull them out of the helm, then the ship just stops moving. So in some cases, it might be better to pull them out of there if they're incapacitated, so the ship at least stops and you don't crash into like mountains or other things. Okay. Then there's boarding. Yes, if your ship's within 5 feet of another ship, you can board and jump. It talks about how monsters might respond to it, so that's maybe something DMs might want to look into. But again, it's very, very little. Like that's the whole paragraph, right? 2 paragraphs about how ships might interact with, or how monsters might interact with ships. Characters in airship combat, and this is the section where they simply really just tell you, treat. It doesn't say this, but this is how I'd summarize it. Treat the ship as the battlefield map itself. Yes, there can be like these weapons and turrets around, and a character can jump into one of those and use their actions to man that thing, fire the weapons, or they can just do their normal character thing. And a lot of the time, that might be how you want to run, quote, ship-to-ship combat, where the ship is not really involved, the ship's not really moving around. You just got 2 ships that are kind of like near each other, and you're just firing at each other, and the ships are just the battlefield, and you just hand wave it and say that your characters aren't in the helm of the ship. It's other people, and the crew members are running all their things. Kind of the ship's just running on its own, and the characters just focus on their actions. And some of them might, yes, be excited to say, I want to fire that turret, that ballista, that magic whatever weapon, because there are magic weapons that you can have on board. So that's that whole section. And it refers you back to the Dungeon Master's Guide for how like ballistas and mangonels and other weapons like that work. All right, finally, we're into some stat blocks now for Eberron specifically. This is the Air Cruiser, the Lyrandar Air Cruiser. Very cool art. This magical ring here, that's the elemental. Like the elemental gets squeezed and squished out through this engine that projects the elemental out through it. And so the elemental is forced into this ring shape, and that creates this, I don't know, like warp bubble around the ship, and now the ship floats and flies. Maybe that's why an anti-magic shield doesn't completely shut it down, because the air elemental is a creature, and that creature doesn't just go away because it's in an anti-magic field. If it were a summoned creature, its summoning would be suppressed while it's in the area, but this is not summoned, like it's bound to this plane and they bind it to the ship. So I guess that's why it doesn't fall out of the sky. There you go. Tells you its AC, its hit points, damage threshold. It's got a crew of 10 that need to run it. Here's the cost, 50,000 gold pieces. It can carry 2 tons of cargo, 40 passengers. All right, these are the crew stations on board this thing. It has the helm that was shown above, plus these. It has 6 lightning turrets, and a lightning turret requires, before it can take the lightning blast action, it requires it needs to have the elemental core, and the elemental core needs to be functioning. The upside here is it doesn't need any additional actions to load and aim. You just fire a lightning blast. So you can be firing this a lot more often, and that makes this, and here's the upside. For player characters, that makes this far more interesting to play, right? Player characters manning a mangonel or ballista or one of the more traditional siege weapons, it takes so many actions that really the player's turn is like, okay, I load it. And then you go around the whole initiative again. Okay, now I aim it. And you go around the whole initiative again. Okay, now I fire. And in very, very few situations is 3 actions just to get one firing of the weapon going to be more damage than the player character could have just done with their spells or weapons or whatever they have, and certainly going to be less fun, right? That's not a fun round, where especially the round is like 15 to 30 minutes, go through everybody, and your whole contribution is I load, boom, and you go around again, I aim. That player is not going to have fun. But they love the fantasy, so I've played with those rules, and players always like, okay, I'm going to take control of the ballista, and I'm going to fire it, and I explain them how it works, where it's like 3 actions. Some of them try it. Okay, try it once. I've never had a player try it twice. They try it once, and they're like, wow, 3 turns where I didn't do anything, and then fired the ballista, and then they never ever try again using those rules. Okay, so this is a nice upgrade. This will be more fun for players. Then you have the shield station, which is interesting. So there's a shield on this ship, the Lyrandar Air Cruiser. It has, AC and hit points. It requires the core to be functioning, and you have to calibrate it and then activate it. So this one does take 2 actions: 1 action to calibrate, 1 action to activate the shield. But there's no duration, or there is a duration. I think it's 1 minute. Yeah, last 1 minute. But there's no limitation on usages, so you could just keep it up all the time, or maybe it's like shillelagh and spells like that, where if you know you're in a combat, then you fire it up. Like, I don't allow people to just do that all the time, because while theoretically, according to the game rules, yes, you could recast it every minute. Practically, real world terms, there's no way you can do that, right? Like, I'm a big gym buff, and yes, I try to have like a 60-second wait between sets. And even if I use my phone to time it, I never hit it exactly on. Never, 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 never. And I try really hard. I guarantee nobody, even with a stopwatch, would hit that every single time. I guarantee you get doing something, you get bored, and 2 minutes go by or 5 minutes go by before you recast it. So I don't allow players to just say, I'm going to keep shillelagh going all day long, every day. No, you can't do that. Because it would also be like bending the rules in a way that it wasn't intended to give you something way more powerful than that thing should have been. So when you activate the shield, the ship and its crew stations gain a +5 bonus to AC, and all creatures on the ship's deck have half cover. So it's a it's a shield for the whole ship and everybody on it. And there's this cool section here that says the mark of warding. If a creature that has the mark of warding occupies the crew station and they activate the shields, they can do it as a bonus action, which means they can calibrate and activate the shields in one round, right? Because 1 action, 1 bonus action. So nice little perk for a mark of the warding member of the party. Then we have the Lyrandar Skiff, which is a much smaller ship. 18 AC, 150 hit points, crew of 2, passengers of 2, cargo half a ton, cost 20,000 gold pieces. So it's got the helm, same crew station we saw above. It also has this tow cable, which is a ranged attack. It's very much like what were those ships called in Empire Strikes Back, right? You fire the tow cable at the legs of the AT-AT, or the AT-AT. While harpooned, the target of the ship can't move more than 100 feet away from each other, and if the target is a medium or smaller creature, it has the grappled condition. The crew member operating the station can release a harpoon target, no action required, and then you can also reel. A target creature grappled by the station's harpoon is pulled 50 feet in a straight line toward the ship. So, cool option there. Yeah. Imagine a bunch of these flying around at the enemy ship, firing these tow cables, these harpoons and tow cables. Cool idea. Very cool fantasy. The Strider airship. This one actually has a map for the deck, but all of the options here in Ghost of Saltmarsh, they all have maps too. So if the ship you're using, from whatever source it is, doesn't have its own map, I would just pick something that looks close enough from Ghost of Saltmarsh and use that map. If you can't find one, maybe you can find some that have better maps, right? They're, for what you're looking for. And there's probably all kinds of like, people creating content for this, creating maps. So you can probably find something. If you can't, default back here to Ghost of Saltmarsh. All right, so this one has a very cool looking map. Nice side view showing you the elemental ring that powers these things. Here's the ship summary. This is kind of a medium-sized one, bigger than the skiff, smaller than the air cruiser. It's got the helm, and then it has arcane launchers, which fire an energy blast, range attack roll, dealing 46 force damage, and requiring no actions other than the attack. So if a player character wants to take these and man them, every turn they could be firing off an arcane blast or an energy blast from the arcane launcher. So that will be funner, a lot more fun than the ballistas and mangonels, right? And then it's got the section on upgrading airships. And that's it. We only have these 3 stat blocks for airships. So if you want to do anything else like the ocean ships that are options in Eberron, you'd want to use the ships and statistics from Ghosts of Saltmarsh or the simplified things in the player's handbook, if you don't have Ghosts of Saltmarsh. But this is some cool stuff. So Ghosts of Saltmarsh also has ship upgrades, superior ship upgrades. I'm not going to go through these, but there's a lot of cool options, a lot of cool ideas for options. Upgrading the ship, upgrading its oars, upgrading its weapons, upgrading the figurehead on the front of the ship to have special benefits, and then miscellaneous upgrades to the ship. So there are some cool options there. You might want to look at those. But these are the options we have from Eberron Forge of the Artificer. You can boost the armor class. So you add protective runes to the ship with 30 days of work and 15,000 gold pieces worth of raw materials. The ship's armor class increases by 1. You can do this 5 times on one ship. So you could increase it by a total of 5 AC. It would require 150 days of work and 75,000 gold pieces. So this is for DMs. Another great thing about vehicles is they are a huge money sink for your players. Okay, I'd encourage you to try to use them in your games. Let the players play with them, and then this is a great way to just siphon off all that gold that the players have, right? Because they have just probably by this point, by the time they have a ship, they've got so much gold built up that they can just buy anything they want, right? So this is a great way to kind of put them back in that state of, ooh, I spent all my gold upgrading the ship, and now I want more. And getting treasure is a big incentive to adventure. Okay, so this is a great way to do it. Hit points. You put special alchemical stuffs on the ship's hull with 7 days of work and raw materials equal to 1/10 of the ship's total cost. Now, I'm not entirely sure if that's the cost right here, 40,000 gold pieces, for example, or is that the cost of 40,000 plus, like if they've already done some armor class improvements? Is it the 40,000 plus each of these 15,000 boosts? Not really clear. Up to the DM to interpret. So 1/10 of the ship's total cost, then the ship's hit point maximum and current hit points both increase by 20. Pretty nice. That is a decent buff, and you can do it 5 times, adding a total of 100 hit points to your ship's. And it says the ship's hit points. Just remember, when you reconcile it with Ghost of Saltmarsh, that means the hull. Okay, so you're adding this to the hull. And then you can add additional crew stations, which would be most likely more weapons. So installing a new crew station takes 14 days of work. Replacing an existing crew station with a different one halves the cost of the new crew station, and an airship's helm can't be removed or replaced. So you're stuck with a helm. But yeah, then it refers you to the Dungeon Master's Guide with all that siege equipment. It says most of the siege equipment shown in the Dungeon Master's Guide can also be installed in an airship as a crew station. And if you have like a full crew complement to run those mangonels and ballistas and cannons and other options there, then those might be good options. Those are not good options for PCs to be using. Okay, so make sure the ship has some kind of these kind of options. So, elemental thrusters. Make sure it has those weapon options that only take 1 action to fire. Okay, if you want the PCs to be using them, right? They're going to have fun with those. They're not going to have fun with the multi-action ones. But here's some options here. You can add elemental thrusters to your airship, 7,500 gold pieces. The ship's flying speed increases by 50 until the start of this crew member's next turn. So it's a separate station, and it requires a separate person to be using it. But once they use it on their action for that turn, the ship's flying speed increases by 50 till the end of that turn, till the beginning of this crew member's next turn. And then it resets, right? So if you have if you have a person in there, they can just be using this over and over and over again during combat to just perpetually add 50 feet of flying speed to your ship. That's a great thing for a crew member to be doing. That is not going to be fun for your player character to be doing. So another reason to have a full complement of crew members. It describes what things looks like. It says that the creature occupying the station has 3/4 cover, which is a lot of them do that, but not all of them. And the ship can only benefit from one boost at a time. So if you put like multiple elemental thrusters on there and they're all manned by different people, it doesn't matter because all of them trying to use it isn't going to stack, right? They only get one boost per turn. But then another cool thing here, mark of passage. If the creature who's using the booster has the mark of passage, then the ship's flight speed increases by 100 feet instead of 50. It's just a huge increase, which is fun and cool. Repair clamps. All right, these cost 5,000. Can be manned by a single person, and you have to have mark of making. Okay, so that's just required. Nobody else can use these. And when you use it, it can repair. It's got a limit of 3 times per day. It repairs the ship by 2d8 hit points. It says only the ship, so not crew stations, I guess. This station facilitates quick repairs. That's a description. And somebody inside of it has half cover, and it has to be operated by somebody with a mark of making. Yeah. Then you have the Sky Veil, which is invisibility for your ship. It requires the charge action and then the cloak action. And the elemental core has to be functioning. And the crew member who mans it has to expend a spell slot of level 1 or higher to charge the Sky Veil. And then once it's cloaked, the ship becomes invisible for 1 hour until the station is destroyed or until a crew member that took this action, loses concentration or leaves the station. So you can fire while cloaked. Yeah, you can be Klingons and Romulans now. This is pretty cool. Very nice upgrade. 15,000 gold pieces, probably well worth it. And if you have a Mark of the Shadow, the person who mans it has the Mark of the Shadow, who operates it. They can take the cloak action as a bonus action, which means they can charge and cloak on the same turn. So they can get it done faster, which is very cool. All right, and the rest of this is like advice for the DM on how to handle like aerial adventures and different things like that. So we don't need to go through it as a player option, but good stuff for the DM. And Ghosts of the Salt Marsh also has a whole section on how to handle travel at sea, different hazards that could occur. It also has a whole section on crew morale and how that affects their quality score, and their quality score affects all the rolls the ship makes. So if they have a positive quality score, that score is added to every one of the ship's checks and attacks. And if their quality score is negative, that is also then applied as a penalty. Has details on officers and how to qualify as an officer, what you can do as an officer, and then a whole bunch of examples of different environments you might find yourselves in at sea, encounters that could happen at sea, other ships you might run into, mysterious islands you could find. So if you're looking for inspiration, and these are easily reflavored to be something that could happen while you're in an airship too, right? You could still be traveling over the ocean in an airship, find mysterious islands, right? Or be hit by a storm. So there's a lot of stuff in this one to help the DMs kind of craft, or at the very least, provide random encounter and exploration opportunities while you're in an airship and make it interesting. And that's all I'm going to cover for this video. It's probably long enough as it is. So thanks for watching. Remember, if you don't have enough D&D in your life, then you can look in the description. It says I've got a link to find me on Start Playing Games and a link to join my Discord, where I only allow cool people. And by cool, I mean non-toxic, right? We're all introverts. We're all, nerdy, quite nerdy. And we love to talk about D&D. And as far as I'm concerned, that's cool. I don't let a-holes on my server. I mean, I guess they could join, but once I see them doing a-hole things, I kick them and ban them. So you don't have to worry about that. Yeah. And remember to be cool when you're playing D&D, because it's a game. It's for fun. That's what we're here for, right? To have fun with friends and to make friends. Now, maybe you didn't know you were here to make friends, but that's what happens when you play D&D with other people. You can make friends, which is good for us. All right. Catch you next time.